Welcome back, Focus Learners. Today, we are looking at an incredibly fascinating and, honestly, super complex puzzle, the stark regional disparities across the Indian subcontinent. It's a topic packed with striking contrasts, wild historical twists, and really high-stakes economics. Okay, let's dive into this explainer and unpack exactly what is driving the North-South divide in India.
Now, to truly grasp this issue without getting lost in all the noise, we're taking a very structured, fair approach. We're going to map this out in 5 clear sections. We'll start with a tale of two Indias, then move into the Great Tax Divide. After that, we'll look at the 1952 policy backfire, the population penalty, and finally, fixing the imbalance.
All right, Section 1, a tale of two Indias. Let's look at these contrasting realities. If you travel across the country, the visible contrast between the northern and southern regions are just immediate. Take a northern state like Bihar, for example. The data shows a literacy rate of just 61%, which is well below the national average, and a life expectancy of 69 years. Travelers often note the fairly chaotic nature of the streets there. Now head down south to a state like Karnataka, and you see a completely different picture. We are talking about significantly higher literacy rates, longer life expectancy, massive, thriving startup hubs, and generally much more orderly infrastructure. You know, the gap in living standards isn't just numbers on a page, it's visceral and undeniable.
And that quality of life gap? Well, it translates directly into macroeconomics. The 5 southern states contribute twice as much to India's GDP compared to the northern states. But what makes this statistic absolutely staggering is that they pull this off despite having 200 million fewer people. This massive economic imbalance sets up the absolute core of the friction we're exploring today.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Great Tax Divide. Let's talk about funding disparities.
See, when you have such a huge gap in economic output, it inevitably creates friction when the central government collects and then redistributes the national wealth. And this number right here tells a very frustrating story for the South. In 2022, for every 100 rupees that the prosperous state of Karnataka contributed to the central government in taxes, they received only 13.9 rupees back for their own state's development.
Now contrast that immediately with Bihar. For every 100 rupees that Bihar contributed, they received a whopping 922 rupees back in government aid. Now, on a purely developmental level, it makes sense, right? Poorest states absolutely need more financial help to build basic infrastructure. But the southern states argue that despite decades of this heavy financial aid, the northern states still struggle deeply with poverty and corruption.
To truly understand the psychology of this friction, let's look at a highly relatable analogy. Imagine you and your brother work at the exact same place. You earn a salary of 10,000 rupees, and your brother earns just 2,000. To make things equal, your parents take 4,000 from your paycheck and hand it directly to your brother. In theory, sure, it's a temporary fix to help him out until he earns more. But in reality, you start to feel penalized for your hard work, asking yourself, well, what's the point? Meanwhile, your brother is suddenly receiving a massive 40% of your salary without having to do anything extra. Unless he's suddenly doing all your chores, this completely disincentivizes him to work harder. This perceived broken incentive structure is exactly what is bothering the southern states right now.
So, how did things get so lopsided in the first place? Section 3, the 1952 policy backfire.
We have to shift from the present to the past to look purely at historical policy decisions. Let's follow this timeline together. Right after independence in 1947, India had a stark geographic split. The South had the coastal ports for trade, and the North had all the inland natural resources. Naturally, factories started setting up in the North, right near those resources. But the government wanted development spread evenly across the whole country. So in 1952, they enacted the Freight Equalization Policy. This basically meant the government subsidized the shipping costs of natural resources to anywhere in India. It sounded fair, right? Well, it actually backfired horribly. Industrialists quickly realized that since the government was paying for the shipping of materials, they could just build their factories down in the south, right next to the lucrative export ports. Over the next 4 decades, this completely drained the north of its geographic advantage, leaving it as a mere resource reserve with heavily stunted economic activity.
In this historical economic drain actually explains a lot of modern cultural stereotypes. You often hear tropes about northern states consuming vast amounts of smokeless tobacco. But let's look at the data objectively here. According to the Global Adult Tobacco Survey, nearly a third of the population in states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar consume this. Why? Because it costs just 1 to 5 rupees. It is simply what they can afford. On the flip side, the data shows that the 5 southern states actually consume more than 50% of the entire nation's alcohol. This clearly shows us the consumption habits are really a function of income, affordability, not some kind of moral superiority.
Moving on to the political side of things. Section 4. The population penalty.
The way the central government allocates funds relies heavily on a state's income level and its population size. Now, what's really interesting about this demographic data is how doing the right thing actually hurt the South economically. Back in the 1970s, India really pushed states to control their surging populations, and the South succeeded brilliantly. In the 1971 census, they made up 38% of the national population. By the 2011 census, that share had successfully dropped down to 32%. But then, in 2017, the central government decided to use the newer 2011 data to allocate tax funds. Because the South had a smaller population share, they received less money. They successfully controlled their population only to be financially penalized for it, while states with booming populations actually received more.
And it gets even more alarming when we look at political power. Currently, parliamentary seats are locked based on that old 1971 data. Entire South India has 129 members of parliament. Meanwhile, just 2 northern states, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, hold a combined 120 MPs. If you add the rest of the northern states, that number rockets past 190 total MPs. The sheer scale of the North's representation creates a massive imbalance in political voice, and that imbalance is about to be heavily tested.
This brings us to a critical, looming event, the 2026 delimitation deadline. This is the year the freeze on parliamentary seats finally expires. If seats are redistributed based on modern population data, the northern states, with their significantly higher populations, will gain even more representation in parliament. We could easily see a scenario where national elections are decided entirely by a handful of northern states. This leaves the South with a severely diminished say in how the country is run, despite being the main economic engine driving the nation. Just think about that from the perspective of a Southern taxpayer for a second.
So how do we actually solve this? Section 5. Fixing the imbalance.
We have to land the plane here by focusing strictly on pragmatic remedies. How do we fix this incredibly complex puzzle without completely tearing the country apart? So the crucial point is that the incentive structures themselves need a total overhaul. The sources highlight 3 concrete solutions for this. First, reward good behavior. The formulas for allocating the budget need to drastically increase the weightage given to states that collect high taxes and effectively control their populations. We have to make doing the right thing financially viable. Second, implementation-based funding. Rather than handing over massive multi-billion-dollar packages all at once, funds should be released in goal-contingent installments. This ensures the money is actually used to build infrastructure and not just lost to corruption. And finally, performance-based bonuses. If a state hits superior numbers in crucial metrics like life expectancy, literacy, and infant mortality, they receive a financial bonus. This directly aligns the state's financial goals with the actual measurable human development of its citizens.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question. How do you think this problem can be solved? Can a nation successfully balance the need to uplift its poorest regions without alienating the economic engines that pay for it? This is a very delicate tightrope of taxation, representation, and historical policy. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this structured look brought some real clarity to what is a very heated topic. I highly encourage you to dig into the data yourself, keep asking questions, and engage further with the material. Until next time, stay focused and keep learning.